Welcome back once again, Smackheads, to your weekly edition of Union Smack. I am, of course, the Maniac Matt tenant. I have the chair, I have a live microphone, but one thing I do not have is my partner in crime, my good friend, my brother from another mother, Travis. You've probably noticed he is conspicuous by his absence. He's going through some challenging personal issues at this very moment. If you've been keeping up on Twitter, then you'll know. If you haven't, then it's none of my business, it's none of your business. It's nobody's business but Travis's, but he won't be back for a while, so get used to hearing my voice on this channel over the coming weeks or months. However long he's out for, we've got his back. We've got you covered, we've got the podcast covered, and Union Smack, the alternative, with James Herbert and Colin, your usual host over there, as well as Muted with myself and Bubba, and the Major League podcast, or Major League Wrestling podcast of their own, with myself and JD, will form the backbone of this channel for however long Travis is out. We may have a few more surprises along the way as well, but let's just see how it goes. Let's see what we can get done, and I hope you all stay along with us for the ride and support Travis. Never was there a kinder friend or a kinder man. Now, we are gathered here today, he says, for another Union Smack retro review. This time we are looking at Bashed in the USA from 1993. This is actually the second recording. Me and Travis did this a few nights ago, but with everything that's happened, the recording never got out. So I'm re-recording it. Just me, I'm in little old lonesome. But before we get into any of that, as always, you can catch me on Twitter at The Perfect Tenant. Do follow Travis, send him your love, send him your best wishes. On Twitter at TheHabickyTMD. Log on to unionsmack.bigcartel.com, buy a t-shirt, buy a book, support your local podcast, especially in these troubling times for everyone. And of course, go to completelynovel.com, where you can purchase a copy of my Undertaker book, A Trip Down Death Valley. Now, I think it's only fitting that before we get into the review of Bashed in the USA for this week's Union Smack retro review, I take a break, I take a drink. I did all that in one massive breath almost. So here is the former and greatest, come on, let's be honest, WWE United Kingdom Champion, the Bruiserweight himself, P.D. Dunne.
I'm the Bruiserweight Pete Dunne, and you're listening to the Union Smack podcast.
Bashed in the USA. Now, for those who didn't listen to last week's Union Smack retro review, that WrestleFest 93, that was a rough ride. It was a rough ride for me. It was a rough ride for Travis. We are talking Berserker. We are talking Kamala, title matches, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Iris. It was rough. It was rough all around. But then, looking back on it, so were a lot of these Coliseum video releases. And of course, that is what Bashed in the USA was. It was a Coliseum video exclusive. And the video began. I say video, it sounds so old-fashioned now. But then VHS doesn't fit either. The VHS show, video, whatever you prefer to call it, began with Mr. Perfect in a stamp shop. I say stamp shop, it was basically a warehouse that WWE had kitted out back in the day with glass cabinets and stamps, etc. And Mr. Perfect would be the man to provide the links between matches. He'd be the backbone of this VHS, if you can call it that. And this was done solely to promote the Coliseum video exclusive stamps that came out with the VHS. Now, if you're wondering what the stamps look like, you can see it in the thumbnail on your screen now, or go and look them up. They're a nifty piece of work, and I found them. Actually, I found them on eBay from a seller in Canada for like, I think it was like £9 British money. And I'm still considering buying them because they'd be pretty neat for the collection, I think. And I know if Travis was here, he'd be telling me to splash the cash also. So I may get them. Maybe we're sitting here, this time next week doing our next Union Smack retro review, and I've already purchased them. Who knows? I'll keep you up to date on that. We kicked off with Razor Ramon versus the Big Boss Man. Now, when we did the original review of this, Travis didn't like it at all, and I can see why. It's Big Boss Man, it's 93 Boss Man as well, so he's almost done with his WWF run. He's wrapping it all up. He's putting his affairs in order, if you like, meaning that his matches are all rinse and repeat. Punches, roll to the outside, play to the crowd, waste a little bit of time, headlocks, whip into the rope, usual finish. However, on this occasion, I would slate this, just like we slated Bossman versus Rick Martel on the WrestleFest retro review last week. However, it had Razor Ramon in it, and of course Scott Hall was a master of the mat. And I know a lot of people probably won't agree with me, but as I said, last week, one of the greatest never to be WWF champion. Scott Hall really carried Big Boss Man Ray Traylor in this. As we did point out, Razor Ramon, aka Scott Hall, he came out and he looked absolutely smacked off his tits. He couldn't have looked happier to be there. And yet, for a heel, as Razor Ramon was at this point in, I think, like end of 92, beginning of 93, he should have looked like Boss Man wasn't worth his time. And yet he came out. At one point, I was convinced he was going to, kiss kids and shake hands. That is how happy he looked to be there. But the bell rang, and it was a nice little opener for what are usually, very tough VHSs to get through. They played around with the nightstick and the toothpick. Both got out the ring. Mind games galore. The one downer on this was Lord Alfred Hayes on commentary, but we'll get more into him in a minute. And even though nothing much happened in this match, I think Ramon carries the Big Boss Man well. It's not boring. It doesn't last, all that long. I think about 6.5 minutes, something along those lines. And Razor rolls him up and puts his feet on the rope for the victory. Now, even though, it was a fine match, the ending looked weak. And as I said, Alfred Hayes on commentary was just abysmal. Him and Gorilla Monsoon all night were absolutely awful. Awful. They get swapped out towards the end of this tape, but Hayes is back with a vengeance for the finale. That took us to Mr. Perfect back in the stamp shop. And he reminisces and harks back to Survivor Series 1992. And the match we're talking about, of course, is Mr. Perfect and the Macho Man Randy Savage versus Ric Flair and Razor Ramon. I enjoyed that match. It was probably my favourite match of the whole card. I enjoy going back to watch it now because Mr. Perfect had that lovely black doublet on with Mr. Perfect sequined on, in the back, and it looked absolutely amazing. Very, very nice indeed. And if you can hear a rattling in the background, that's my guinea pig drinking water, so apologies for that. When the recollection of the match finishes, we are back with Mr. Perfect in the stamp shop, looking for someone to help him find the perfect stamp. And you can already see where the series of vignettes between matches are going. The next cab off the rank was a 6-man tag team match. Money Incorporated and the model, Rick Martel. And I always used to love how ring announcer Mike McGurk used to pronounce his name. She was very good. I sometimes miss her on ring announcing. Anyway, well off the track there. Money Inc. and Rick Martel versus High Energy and Tatanka. Oh yes, it can get worse. Now, it was around about this time Travis told this story on our first go-around. That around about this time in late 92, right at the beginning of 1993, of a WWF Championship reign for Tatanka. They were going to put the strap on him. They fancied him to carry it, but can you imagine? Can you imagine now, looking back, the list of stars to hold it back then? Bret Hart, Undertaker, Ric Flair, and then Tatanka just tagged on to the end. It would have been horrendous. I'd have been all for a Tatanka Intercontinental Championship run, but to even consider Tatanka as WWF champion, especially in '92 when he was just really getting going with the undefeated gimmick and the feathers, and he'd have the feud with Rick Martel over the feather. Oh my god, it would have been horrendous, absolutely horrendous, and even worse if we're playing off history and going by what actually happened, he would have then presumably dropped it to Ludwig Borger, the first man to defeat him. That would have been death for the company right there. So I'm glad that was, mooted or muted by whoever put pay to that, because nobody ever needed Tatanka as WWF champion. I love Tatanka, but a step above, I think. Now, this match, before we get into the action, we're going to go back to Gorilla Monsoon and Alfred Hayes because they are absolutely horrendous. And this, bear in mind, is only the second match in, and you've already had enough of them by the time the bell rings here. You'd have thought that, whoever put these VHS compilations together, Marty Applebaum, if you believe Lord Alfred Hayes, would have learnt from WrestleFest, where it was all Lord Alfred Hayes with various commentary partners, and he was absolutely hideous in each and every match. But they didn't learn, because Alfred Hayes was supposedly sucking the cock of someone higher in Titan Towers, or Marty Applebaum, I'm not sure which, and he gets another go around here. And talking of Marty Applebaum, you'll know who he is if you tuned into our WrestleFest 93 review. He gets yet another mention by Lord Alfred Hayes. And I swear to God, Hayes is more bothered about Marty Applebaum and him and Gorilla just ripping the piss out of Chief J Strongbow, who, I didn't write the quote down, Travis had it, but it was something along the lines of Chief J Strongbow said to him that he's got thin legs, and Gorilla Monsoon said to Chief J Strongbow, I'm not surprised they're carrying around 3 people. Something along those lines. But whatever Chief J Strongbow did to piss off Gorilla Monsoon, it must have been really bad, because Gorilla Monsoon just does not let up. Absolutely slaughters him. On to the match itself. I would have preferred, or even liked in history, anywhere, a Ted DiBiase versus Owen Hart feud of more than one match in length, really, when they were both in their prime. That would have been absolutely amazing. Be it a heel DiBiase versus a face Owen Hart, or, vice versa. I think them two would have tore the house down, and I'm sad, genuinely sad, that we never got to see an Owen Hart versus Ted DiBiase match. With both of them really, really on top. Coco Beware, the dancing clown. He spent an age here just dancing and pissing about. He got a tag from Tatanka at one point. Tatanka had Ted DiBiase in an arm lock, and Beware went up to the top rope and just must have been a good 6-7 seconds dancing on the top rope. That was just one of the many things that made this match slow and meandering, and just it was a filler. It's an absolute filler. Now, we had a similar match on last week's review. I think it was High Energy and El Matador versus the Nasty Boys and Rick Martel, if my memory serves me correctly. This was better than that, but not by much. To their credit, however, you can see that Money Inc., Ted DiBiase and IRS, IRS, who is sweating like, a paedophile in a nursery. You can see that they're really trying with Tatanka. They try to, control him. They try to lead him around. When Tatanka's in charge, they try to give him directions and put the match together for him. So kudos there. But it does not come off. And worse, and it does get worse, ladies and gentlemen, the end to this match. Now, the end came when IRS pinned Koko Beware. Now, you might think, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Heels go over, fine. High Energy wouldn't have got anything from it anyway. It's the way they went about this. IRS and Koko Beware, both the illegal men. Referee does not care one iota. And for somehow, and I did go back and I rewound the footage. I still don't know what IRS did to Koko Beware to pin him. I feel like the footage goes from a normal 6-man tag to an all-out brawl. You see Ted DiBiase on the outside, and then it cuts back in, and IRS is pinned Koko Beware, and you totally miss how. I'm not sure whether it was, a chop block from behind. I'm not sure whether it was an illegal briefcase shot, some, dirty deed. I just have no idea. It was an absolutely hideous ending. And talking of hideous, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. We are back with the perfect one, Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig, and a cashier in the stamp shop. And by now, this is the third... Yeah, sorry, I was just looking on my my format. This was actually the third vignette of Kurt Hennig in 2 matches. So it went vignette, match, vignette. By this time, the novelty had worn off. He had nothing to say. They'd clearly flown Mr. Perfect out to do this wherever it was recorded. Could have been, in the bowels of Titan Towers, who knows. But they'd flown him out especially for this. It must have taken them an hour, if that, to record with setup as well. And I would say a good 5 minutes into recording, Kurt Hennig looks absolutely bored. He looks like, why did you even fly me out for this? I have no purpose. I could have done this, sat in my armchair with a picture or, the Coliseum video exclusive stamps in a frame next to me. It would have achieved the same thing. So he looked really pissed off. However, what he introduces next was possibly, one of the best parts of the entire VHS. A profile on Heartbreak Kid and WWF Intercontinental Champion Shawn Michaels. We are then taken to Mean Gene Okerlund, and I love Mean Gene Okerlund, and Shawn Michaels in an interview position. He says that we will now see some title defences from the Heartbreak Kid, and Shawn says that it's been hard to narrow this compilation down to just 3 of his title defences. And then he says it, and the words he says next make your heart just sink. Because Shawn Michaels says that his first championship defence is against Kamala. Oh yes, ladies and gentlemen. Now, this is after Kamala received an Intercontinental Championship match from Bret Hart on our WrestleFest 93 retro review. You will get so sick of me saying that during this, and I apologise, but it's always good to plug your shit, And this is exactly what we got. Michaels versus Kamala, Intercontinental Championship. Now, I have no idea what Kamala did to get so many championship matches on VHS releases. I have absolutely no idea. He was, and it's a shame to say it, because I know he's lost his legs in the present, and that's a bloody shame. But Kamala was never a wrestler. He was a big man who could splash, who could slap his belly, who could run around the ring and look fearsome. That was the extent of his arsenal, and yet he got more than his fair share of championship matches. And it's just baffling. However, this one wasn't as bad as I'm making it sound. I moan, but this was quite good, I'll be honest. For a Kamala match, I would recommend this. For a Kamala match. What the fuck am I talking about? Anyway, Kamala was babyface here, which is actually worse. He was a worse babyface than he was heel. You know, the remedial, retarded Kamala with Slick in his corner, who, you know, basically told him everything to do. He had the same look on his face, Kamala, when he didn't know what was going on, that my cat has. And it just was never believable. Even as a child watching this, I remember thinking that this just isn't, you know, a believable Kamala. The size, the look of him, even the body paint was made to be a fearsome heel. And another thing I'll add before, you know, I procrastinate, but we will get to this match, bear with me, is that what led Kamala to be a babyface was that Harvey Whippleman and Kimchi were abusing him, basically. They were bashing him about, they were slapping him, you know, they were taking advantage of him. And then he obviously turned on the pair. But that, again, just not believable. As if Steve Lombardi in a mask and Harvey Whippleman in his suit and flat cap would ever be able to, you know, tell Kamala to do anything. He'd have eaten them alive. So I think Kamala had a lot going against him as a character and as a professional wrestler. The match itself, very good, as I said. Shawn Michaels was the star here. As the champion, he threw himself around for his challenger. He made Kamala look great. If you'd never seen a Kamala match before this, then you would have sworn that Kamala was a superstar. Shawn Michaels made him look that fantastic. The end came when Michaels threw Slick to the floor on the outside. He walked away, and then Kamala followed him for a double countout. Not the first screwy finish on this or any other Coliseum video release. The other thing I will say about this is I absolutely love Shawn Michaels' blue Intercontinental Championship belt. Looks amazing. Back we go to Mean Gene and Shawn. They talk about Kamala for a few seconds and then tell us that Skinner is next. Oh yes, Steve Keirn's Skinner. Oh, I told you it didn't get any better. I'm not going to spend too long on this match. Michaels, Skinner, Intercontinental Championship. It was slow, it was plodding. This was just not interesting, you know, in the slightest, for me at least. I know Travis quite liked this match, but it felt odd to watch Skinner as a babyface. And that's the role he embodied here. He was a complete and utter babyface. I don't ever remember him turning face on a Superstars or a Wrestling Challenge. A lot of them are up on the network now, so I might even go back and have a look. But you know, nothing comes to memory, and yet here he is on the Coliseum video in 1993 as a babyface. Maybe they hoped that, you know, he'd have that Crocodile Dundee charm, but it never came off. Michaels wins this match, shocker, with the Sweet Chin music, but it still wasn't his regular finisher. That was still either the backdrop driver he used to use or the spike pile driver I believe he had for a very short time in 93 and 94. And then mercifully, we actually get a really good match. Shawn Michaels versus Virgil for the Intercontinental Championship. Me and Travis reviewed that on the WrestleFest 93 Retro Review, so I won't even bother going into that, apart from saying it has to be Virgil's best ever singles match, and do go out of your way to watch it. You won't regret it. The Shawn Michaels spotlight ends with Mean Gene and Shawn talking about his social life, and him being a socialite, no one cares. And then Michaels says that he's got to go because he can hear chicks banging on the door. And this is the highlight of the entire spotlight, at least for me, because Mean Gene, you know, deadpan as anything you like, just turns and says to him, well, you better go and let them out then. on the fly. I'm sure that wasn't even scripted, but Mean Gene was amazing when he was just thinking, shit up on his own. Sadly, this VHS wasn't over yet. It had already felt like 3 hours, I will admit, by the time we got, here. But we're back with Mr. Perfect in the stamp shop, and it's just dull now. So they don't need to keep throwing it back to him after every match or segment. They could have had him do the beginning, do a sizable chunk in the middle, because there were a few bits, that he did were quite entertaining. And then, obviously, the end, when he actually, finds the perfect stamp, you can already see what it's going to be. And then Mr. Perfect introduces us to the low light of the entire VHS, a 40-man battle royal. Dear God, if this doesn't go 30 minutes, then I will quit podcasting. It felt every bit 30 minutes. And honestly, I didn't time it, but that could just be WWF filming every fucking entrance to this match. Now, they didn't get their own theme music, so it wasn't like we had to, do a 3-minute entrance for every wrestler. But honestly, if I'd have been in the arena, I would have been so pissed off. This was obviously recorded at the end of, some 6-hour taping. Every wrestler who came out was soaked in sweat. They'd had 2 or 3 matches before this for various, prime times, wrestling challenge, superstars, etc. None of them wanted to be there. I wouldn't have wanted to see them. The crowd did pop, I'll be honest. After like 6 hours, the crowd was still alive for this. And it looked promising. Because first out came Shawn Michaels. And then out came Bret Hart. And then... And you knew, what sort of match this was going to be. Because it cut to, a hard camera at the bottom of the aisle. And out came every fucking jobber in the locker room. And I am talking about men like Tom Stone and Brian Costello. Men of Barry Horowitz in his pink and yellow trunks, which I have to add to my Barry Horowitz on Fire Pro Wrestling. And it took so long, and they were all at least 2 meters apart. Even in 1993, they were practicing social distancing, so bravo to them. But they were all like 2 meters apart, and they walked down to the ring like it was a funeral procession. Just jobber after fucking jobber. And then at the end of all these jobbers, you got the real stars. Natural Disasters, Legion of Doom, Nasty Boys. The real meat and bones of this match. And if that had been it, I wouldn't have been complaining. And then the bell rang. And you've got a ring that is absolutely jam-packed with humanity. And when I say jam-packed with humanity, I mean there wasn't a space in the ring. How they moved was absolutely fucking beyond me. They did the sensible thing, right? Because if I was in the Battle Royal, and Travis said this last time around, my strategy would be go for the big man first. And they did. Earthquake, Typhoon, tossed within the first few seconds. And sadly, that was the booking of this match throughout the entire 25-30 minutes. There were jobbers here who lasted longer than bona fide stars. I shit you not. Tom Stone, who looked a dead ringer for Kevin Kelly, and Brian Costello and Barry Horowitz and a few others who, I can't pick out the top of my head now, they lasted longer than Legion of Doom, Natural Disasters, Ted DiBiase, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, who was Intercontinental Champion when this was recorded. It was baffling. Absolutely baffling. And even worse was the ending to this Battle Royal. Beverly Brothers, IRS, teamed up against Tatanka. It was 3-on-1. Tatanka, naturally eliminates them all. But go back and watch it, because the last elimination, I think it's Beverly, it might be Blake, one of the Beverly Brothers, is hanging on the apron for about 5 minutes before Tatanka just knocks him off. It's absurd. Absolutely absurd. Horrible match. Horrible choice to put on, this VHS release. It was obviously booked as a go-home match, a feel-good for the audience, never meant to be seen. But Marty Applebaum, we need a word, my friend. It was picked, just to plonk onto this VHS, and it was a terrible, terrible decision. Shame on you, Marty. Back we go, not surprisingly now, is it, to Mr. Perfect looking at some stamps. He is told a stamp is worth $2 million, and he decides to keep it because he tells the cashier that it's a fake, I believe, and it's worthless, and he keeps the stamp. Ha ha, ha ha, ha ha. Next up, we get Travis's favourite part of the entire VHS. It's not a match. It's another spotlight, this time of Bret Hitman Hart exhibiting his art. And that is basically what the whole thing's called. It's called Bret Hart Art. Catchy, right? This is Bret Hart drawing cartoon characters of The Undertaker, of Money Inc., etc. And it's fine. I didn't like it personally, but I know Travis loved it. It's different. However, my main gripe with it is that this is already a 2-hour VHS release. And I felt it just held it up. Had you given this 15 minutes and cut the Battle Royal completely, totally different story. Bret Hart Art, with, by the way, the cheapest intro graphics, you could dream up. You've got a man here who can genuinely draw. Why not have him draw the graphic for the opening? Baffling. This led us into Bret Hart versus Rick Martel for the WWF Intercontinental Championship. This is turning into best of the Intercontinental title now. I say best. There was nothing best about the Shawn Michaels Skinner match. Sorry, Trav. I love you, man, but it didn't sit well with me. Bret Hart, Rick Martel. Now, again, before we get into the match, a little fact for you. A little Matt fact. This was one of the major contributors that they used for the Shawn Michaels versus Rick Martel video package at SummerSlam 1992. And when we get into the end, you'll all see why. Very good technical match. Best match on the card by far. Bret Hart and Rick Martel, they tear it up. And in my opinion, you may disagree, that's fine. This is how the more agreeable members of the IWC have a debate. We don't call each other names, we don't block each other. It's a simple, nice, friendly debate. I like something, you don't. That is absolutely fine. Martel, in my opinion, had some of his best singles matches in the WWF against Bret Hart. This one was absolutely great. His match with Bret at UK Rampage 92, very, very good indeed. I know they had some crackers on house shows, and I wish this Rick Martel had have been present for his entire singles WWF run. Instead of giving him Tatanka, and the war over the eagle feather, I think Travis said it was, and just matches that didn't mean anything against the big boss man, and then, rehashing his rivalry with Tito Santana after Strikeforce broke up. That was all meaningless. Had you given him more matches like this one with Bret Hart, I think Martel would have been able to have taken the Intercontinental Championship and been a solid upper mid-card wrestler for the company. There was no reason why he shouldn't have been. Now, as good as this match was, commentary let it down again. And this wasn't Alfred Hayes. This was Randy Savage. This was Jim Ross. This was Bobby Heenan. And it still wasn't very good. Sadly. It was on off day, I think, for Jim Ross. Randy Savage is asked to explain the difference between Bret Hart and Rick Martel. A fair question if you're on commentary. His explanation, appalling. He beats around the bush like he's trying to put out a fire, and then he completely avoids the subject. I can't even remember what his answer was, but it was something like, I can't explain the difference between the two. That's not an explanation, Randy, sorry. I'd have pushed him on it. I'd have been a prick, and I'd have pushed him on it. But, maybe I'm just a prick. Rick Martel uses the atomizer, hits Bret in the throat, puts him in a Boston Crab. Is the title in sight? No, it's not, because out comes Shawn Michaels. And he beats on Bret Hart while he's in the Boston Crab, gets Rick Martel disqualified, thus helping to further their SummerSlam 1992 match. Now, before we move on, and we are almost at the end of this VHS now, so do bear with me. Shawn Michaels was fresh out of the Rockers. He'd just, not too long before this, turned on Marty Jannetty, threw him through Brutus Beefcake's barbershop window, and that seemed to be like the peak of Shawn Michaels' heel turn. There was nothing else really, after that. The match with Martel at SummerSlam was the Sherry Show. It was all about sensational Sherry. It wasn't about Shawn. It wasn't about Rick Martel. Had it have been, they could have put on a 15-minute classic. It wasn't. It was about Sherry. Shawn had matches with Randy Savage for the WWF Championship earlier that year. He'd knocked about with a few of the big-time stars, but there had been nothing solid for him. So in essence, the feud with Martel was his first major feud. Okay? What an odd feud to give him. You've got this heel who's come out this popular tag team. You want to capitalise on it. And yet they put him in a heel versus heel feud, and it just never worked. At least for me. It might have worked for you, that's fine. Did not work for me. I would have gone about this completely different. I would have delayed the Rockers split until after SummerSlam, and then I would have had Shawn Michaels turn on Marty Jannetty after SummerSlam, as he did, maybe even at SummerSlam. Yeah, that would have been a great SummerSlam moment. And then the first thing you ever see him do as a heel would be to beat the British Bulldog for the Intercontinental title, like he did after SummerSlam. That would have put him in such, a high echelon. It would have held him in greater stead with the audience, because they pissed about with him for a long while before they put the title on him. Just imagine how much stronger and how much better and more believable he'd have looked had he thrown Jannetty through the window, and 2 weeks later, he's got Sherry, he's the Heartbreak Kid, and he beats the British Bulldog for the Intercontinental title. God, that would have been amazing. But hey, what do we know? We're only fans. Next up was, arguably the worst match on the card. Beverly Brothers versus the Natural Disasters. Now, I'm not sure whether this was the rematch from SummerSlam or the precursor to their SummerSlam match. But this couldn't have been, far either side. This was every Natural Disasters tag team match you've ever seen. This was every Beverly Brothers heel match you've ever seen. Punch, kick, tag, kick, rest hold, kick. You get the drift. Absolutely hideous. I don't know why Earthquake was sweating so much. Maybe seeing a kid in the front row. Who knows? And the Beverly Brothers win by countout. All of this, I think this went like 14 minutes for a countout. Absolutely fucking hideous. Hideous. Do go out of your way to avoid this one. It is just not worth your time. Back we go to Mr. Perfect. And he's almost there. He's almost found the perfect stamp. He's looked through everything, and he's found nothing he wants. He's got books and books of stamps. And if you've ever done stamp collecting, I did for a while with my granddad. It's fucking boring. You know, I know this was done specifically to promote the stamps that came with the VHS. But fuck me. What a boring subject to, try and get a child interested in. It's absolutely hideous. And I've heard it compared to, putting stickers in a book. And I used to do sticker books as a kid, football sticker books, WWF sticker books. I still enjoy doing them, and I'm nearly 34 in October. But stamp collecting, it's so dull. There's no space for them. You're just lining stamps up on a page neatly. Get laid. So Mr. Perfect cannot find his perfect stamp, and he introduces us then, as eager as we are to get out of this fucking VHS, to the main event. Yokozuna versus The Undertaker. Now, before you switch off in disgust, bear with me. This was their first ever meeting in the ring. End of 92, beginning of 93. It's in the book, The Undertaker, A Trip Down Death Valley, which you can buy now from completelynovel.com. It'll make the quarantine season pass with ease, I promise. This was a very good match. Now, I'm not talking Undertaker, Shawn Michaels caliber match. I'm not talking Ric Flair. But for Undertaker, who, let's not forget, was still quite green at the end of 92, beginning of 93. He hadn't all come together for him yet. And Yokozuna, who was a terrific big man wrestler. Me and Travis had this conversation, on the first recording, that Yokozuna doesn't get enough praise from anyone, really, for, the caliber of wrestler that he was. For a man of his size, he could move even like a cruiserweight. He never did anything off the top rope. He could move. Technically, he was very good. So, when we look at the history of big men, I think Yokozuna deserves a much needed round of applause. He was taken from us before his time, sadly, but he could have gone years as WWF champion. You could have got years out of his heel run if you'd have booked him right. It's a crime that they just didn't bother. He was a one-trick pony to them. He had a shelf life, sadly. This match, though, do go back and watch it. It is the best match the two men have ever had together. And that, goes for their Royal Rumble 94 match. That goes for their Survivor Series 94 match. And this is what their Royal Rumble 94 match could have been without the distraction of the casket, without the distraction of, the cast of thousands coming to save Yokozuna from certain doom. It was tight. It was well put together. And it was just a pleasure to watch overall. And if you can hear a bit of jingling in the background this time, that's my cat eating. His collar catches against his dish, so you have my apologies. The most notable thing, however, I will say, and it's a shame that this is one of the most notable things, apart from how good the match was, is, again, Alfred Hayes strikes on commentary. What you get from this isn't what a great commentator Alfred Hayes was. All you get from this is how much Hayes loved Asian girls, and I swear to you, I thought that he was masturbating under the desk of whatever studio he was recording his commentary in. This was Alfred Hayes when he was looking at Yokozuna's geisha girls. Now we some lovely Asian girls there. They are young. They are very lovely, aren't they? Oh, lovely Asian girls. I swear to you, that is what Alfred Hayes did. It was absolutely ridiculous that they didn't take this out or make him re-record it. Awful. And to top that off, that wasn't his only misdemeanor during the match. He called Yokozuna's salt bucket a cookie barrel, because the two things are so similar, and sounded like he knew absolutely nothing about Yokozuna or The Undertaker, or indeed professional wrestling, a sport in which he participated in his younger years for at least a few decades. He was terrible. If I never have to listen to Alfred Hayes on commentary ever again, I will be a happy man. The end of this match comes when Yokozuna hits The Undertaker with his salt bucket. Taker wins by disqualification. And then following the match, Yokozuna tries to hit The Undertaker with a banzai drop, misses, and Taker knocks him down with a clothesline. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, finally we're at the end. And I can hear all your sighs, if only you could hear mine. We're at the end of this Coliseum video release. Mr. Perfect strikes again, back in the stamp shop. And finally he's got his hands on the perfect stamp. And if you're looking at the thumbnail for this episode, you can already tell what it is. He opens up a stamp book, and inside, framed, is a stamp with Mr. Perfect's face on it. Oh yes, as if we didn't know at the beginning of this what the punchline was going to be. And that was the end. Sorry for that sigh. But that was the end. I would rate this... I think me and Travis both rated this C- last time around. I would have given it a B had it not been for Lord Alfred Hayes, because there was quite a lot of decent stuff on this. It was just everything around it that dragged it down. Undertaker versus Yokozuna, go out of your way to see. Bret Hart versus Rick Martel, go out of your way to see. Bret Hart's art, go out of your way to see. It is a worthy entry. Razor versus Bossman in the opener was fine enough, and 2 out of 3 of Shawn Michaels' championship defences were worth your time as well. Like I say, the only thing that dragged this down was Alfred Hayes on commentary. I hope the next time we look back at a Coliseum video release, Alfred Hayes isn't the curse that sinks it. Thank you very, very much for listening, ladies and gentlemen. I know it's an odd time right now, but we've got you covered. If you didn't hear me in the beginning, then Union Smack will be here with me, hopefully every week, as often as I can get it out. The alternative will now be with Colin and with James Herbert, who is standing in for Travis over there. Bubba and myself will bring you Muted, and JD and myself will bring you a Major League Wrestling podcast of their own. So you'll be hearing a lot more from me. And of course, on top of all that, Tenant Talks will return, but that isn't what is important right now. What's important right now is a friend in need. What is important right now is that we're all there for someone who has been there for us. So hop onto Twitter. Go to Travis's Twitter account at the Habiki TMD. Leave him some love. Leave him some words of support. And we miss you, buddy. We miss you already. And a speedy recovery. We hope to see you back here soon. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. I will be back with Bubba, with JD, with Tenant Talks. I'm all over this podcast now until Travis gets better. So, until next time, in the words of the man himself, cheerio, mate.